If you've ever walked around Old Town Alexandria and wondered about the beautiful homes in our neighborhood, then this episode is for you. Hi, I'm Jane Khodos Beyer, and welcome to the People You Meet in Old Town Alexandria podcast, a show about the fascinating people who live in our community. Today's guest is Anne Metcalf. Anne is a lobbyist, an architectural enthusiast, a historic home restorer, and now an author of this beautiful book called Old Town at Home. Anne and I get to talking about the hidden history of some of these old town homes, what it takes to preserve them, and also her lobbying career. I learned so much from talking to Anne, and I'm excited to share this podcast with you. So with that, let's welcome Anne. Anne, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Thank you, Jane. I am so impressed by your starting this podcast about this community and town that we know and love. Thank you for having me here today.
Absolutely. Well, I love this town so much. And I had the pleasure of meeting you at your book signing a couple of months ago, which is a gorgeous book. We have it right here, and it's on my coffee table, and I'm sure it's on the coffee table of many other residents here in Old Town. So it's fun to have you here to dive a little deeper into the why behind the book and learn more about you. So with that, Anne, I would love to learn more about you and your personal journey, how you got to this point, maybe what your career was like leading up to this point before you became an author of this awesome book. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Jane. And again, to be able to be here with you, especially given your background in communications and marketing, it's a real pleasure for me. This book has been a real delight to do, and it's my first book. And my background is I grew up in McLean, Virginia. For those from the area, people know where that is, but for any listeners who are outside of the DC area, it's approximately 15 miles north along the Potomac River. McLean is a more leafy suburb than Old Town. We grew up in a Spanish-style 1927 house on the bluffs of the Potomac River. Literally, I could look out my bedroom window and see DC. Had a huge garden. Did not have neighbors nearby, which is one of the great differences of living in an urban setting like Old Town. But one of the things I was thinking about that I think was an influence that contributed to my love of history was in our yard, what we called the lower garden, which was down sort of, as you went down the hill towards the cliff. After heavy rains, around the roots of certain dogwood trees, we would discover Indian arrowheads. Indian arrowheads, spear points, grinding tools, other things that related to the settlement of Native American peoples in the Washington, D.C. area, going as far back as 13,000 years ago.
Wow.
So that, I think, connected not only to an early interest as a kid in history, but my parents, my father was an architect, my mother was an artist. They both were involved in different professional and volunteer activities here in Alexandria. So my time in Old Town, first visits date from early childhood. And my mother was one of the founding members of the Athenaeum, or the organization that purchased the Athenaeum and turned it into an art center. Mm. That's, of course, the old bank building on Lower Prince Street.
The pink, the salmon
yes,
colored
exactly,
building.
the
yeah,
salmon
so
color,
pretty.
Salmon color building that after it was a bank, it was commandeered by the Union Army during the Civil War. It later served as a factory and had other purposes and became very derelict, as many parts of Old Town did at a certain time, and have in cycles. And then later was purchased by the Northern Virginia Fine Arts Association and turned into the wonderful space that it is today. So fast forward my professional background, I worked at the US EPA for a while. I worked in conservation, but then I think my connection to culture and peoples, both through childhood influences from my parents. We lived abroad. We lived in Egypt for a while, so that led me to also have an appreciation for earlier times and culture. And I have had the opportunity to lobby for, surprise, surprise, major museums and other cultural.
Very cool. I had no idea.
Yeah, have had some wonderful museum clients over the years and other organizations that are both cultural and artistic conservation oriented. So that's a little about me and a little bit, the architecture influence, the influence from my mom with the decorative arts that led me to, I think, always appreciate beauty and love beautiful homes.
I just learned so many things from you in that intro, so thank you for that. I had no idea. And I also love history, which is why I live in a historic home here in Old Town, and I'm really proud that we have a plaque on our house, and Chris and I are big history buffs, and so we actually also got married in a museum.
Really?
In D.C., yes.
Oh,
the Anderson House.
Oh, yes, of course, it's a wonderful house, yeah.
Yeah, but just I share that passion with you about history, and I think it's just so cool. So, Anne, I'm just curious about other historic homes. You don't live in McLean anymore, but you also talked about like restoration in some of your conversations. Tell me about that. Have you been restoring homes as well?
Absolutely, yes. When we first moved to Old Town to be with my now ex-husband, I moved from a wonderful apartment in D.C. to Old Town, and we lived in various apartments in the beginning, and then ultimately bought a small 1860 clapboard Federal on Duke Street. Little bitty house, charming house. It was lucky to have a backyard where you actually could have a garden and parking. And that was my first hands-on experience as an adult, as a young adult, not living in historic homes with my family earlier, but to have an appreciation for what went into the workmanship of the home, and then also to appreciate the challenges that come with living in Old Town, because as you know, I'm sure there are restrictions on what one can do to the exterior of the house. That's a good thing, really, because it's what makes this community cohesive and consistent over time, and what makes it appealing. But also, I think for many new homeowners to the area, it's a little bit of shock when they realize what you can do and what you can't do. The very simple thing of even putting like a skylight, as we did, in our rooftops can be a months-long process. So there was that home at first, and then we moved to a much larger home just a block away on Prince Street that had been, like many homes had been in Old Town. I don't know if your house also went through this in its history, and it had been converted to apartments and used for commercial.
Not our house, but a house a few doors over that they went through that, and then they tore everything down, and now it's a home.
So that process for us, it had been converted to 4 apartments around the World War II era when Old Town was coming out of its slump. The torpedo factory here was literally booming away, and other businesses supporting sort of the World War II effort. So it had been converted to multi-unit housing, and also for a time, part of our house, the back of it, the flounder part, had been used for a time as a daycare called Babyland, which we found out from the woman who did the home history. And so that was a 2-year process. We lived in the home while we were renovating it, and lots of hilarious incidents happened and some that were not so hilarious, but I even remember having 4 kitchens, 4 stoves, 4 refrigerators, 4 trying to get rid of things, how to deal with all that, rewiring the house, putting in central AC. Some of the discoveries in that process were fabulous.
Well, Old Town homes have a lot of quirks, as we're finding out.
They do.
Yes, so you're never done.
You are never done. Even something as simple as cutting into a wall, maybe to revise a door frame or to put in HVAC. In our case, and I'm sure you may have had this experience here, I think it's a beautiful thing to look back on what I would call almost like a rainbow of the paint colors and wallpapers that you see that were put in by previous homeowners. In that house, we found oyster shells that were wedged in and around under the floorboards around the fireplaces, and we initially didn't know what that was for, and then our contractor at the time, he said, I think this was an early fireproofing technique where they put the shells in under the wood, so if a spark had landed outside of the stone, that would have prevented the ember from migrating further. And then, of course, as probably here in this home too, you find out that the beams in your attic or in your cellar, oftentimes those beams were repurposed from old ship's masts here from the Alexandria harbor. Yeah, so really cool stuff like that.
That is really cool. So two things. One is we do have a book about this house. So somebody in the 90s, one of the previous owners from the 90s, wrote a book about our house. And we know that this house, the land on which this house stands, was charted by young George Washington. So back to the loving history bit, and how cool is that, right? To be able to say that. But recently, my husband was cleaning out our storage space in the basement, so we're lucky to have storage space here. And he found a spoon, like a historic spoon that was lost in the boards. And so we have it, and I think we need to bring it to the Historic Society because it was probably originated from probably even before 1840, because I put it through AI to ask to identify what period it's from. And so it generated just really cool tidbits about this object that we found. But it's just cool. History's coming alive.
Absolutely. Yeah, the original builder, owner of our house on Prince Street, which was built over several years and I think finalized in 1815. That house's owner was a cooper, a barrel or a cask maker. And of course, you think of barrels and casks being, for liquids, but also they were, of course, how people transported tobacco, right? And they would have rolled those casks of tobacco leaves down Prince Street to Alexandria Harbor. And his workshop would have been behind the house. And behind the house on Prince, now no longer, but when we first moved to the neighborhood, there was this decrepit old building, almost like a really large shed that was falling apart behind what was then the first locations of Misha's Coffee House on Route 1.
Love Misha's, go there all the time.
Yes, Misha's is a great local institution. And so this big shed, we were like, why is it there? It would have been much coveted parking. It ultimately fell down and was demolished. It was later that I learned it was the last public stables left in Old Town where people would have kept their horses. If you didn't keep a horse on your own property, which many people didn't have the space to do that, you would have boarded your horse at the public stables. And there it was, the vestiges of the stables that would have supported, I don't know how many households or businesses around the block. I just find that kind of stuff really cool.
That is really cool. Yeah. Is that something you knew all along, or was that part of like your research for the book?
That was something that I found out through an elderly neighbor who'd lived there for decades on that block, and who told me when I said, what's the story about this building, this decrepit building behind us? Some organization has done a survey of the alleys in Old Town, I know, because of course a lot of them have cobblestones and are beautiful, and some of them, I think, have very storied histories that we don't really know about. It's too bad there isn't a plaque that's up there, but I think there's a movement to put more plaques or more informational interpretation up for visitors and for homeowners, so you really, and that's what of course, is so special about this town, is that every house, every block has got an amazing story.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think for me, the genesis of the book was, and I know you and I have talked about this before, it was after leaving a dinner party at a friend's beautiful home, just absolutely great historic home, not decorated in a traditional way, but in a way that both respects its architectural and its architectural history and its workmanship, appropriate for contemporary living. And I was driving through Old Town, and it was in the fall, and it's a very voyeuristic town.
Yeah.
Like we all love to peer in those.
Picturesque and
it's very picturesque. It's just a beautiful place. It's of course now a very high-end neighborhood and very sought-after tourist destination. But I also thought of another family that I knew was in transition, where someone had passed away, and the disposition of that family home was unclear at the time, or at least unclear to me. And I was wondering what would happen to it. And I thought it would be really lovely if there was a book at this time that captured the beauty of Old Town, because I think we're at one of our peaks in terms of the history. And again, as with all cities and towns, the city has been through a lot of phases, and so that was really the genesis for the book. These two homes made me think, when was the last time anyone has done a book on Old Town? And then I realized it was all the way back in 1946. There have been guidebooks, of course, since then, but nothing that was a significant interiors book. And that book in 1946, you know, surprise, surprise, the photographs were in black and white. So,
sure. And you really brought some of these beautiful homes to life in your book.
We did. And even in the last, almost year now since we completed shooting, and since the book was launched in December, there have already been transitions in several of the households that we include in the book. Some people are moving, so the homes will be going to new owners. One homeowner sadly passed away, so lots of transition. And that was the other thing that I think was the impetus for the book was, and we talked about this, about how we have these exterior preservation easements, but it's pretty rare still to have an interior preservation easement. And some homeowners seek those because they want to make sure that certain aspects of their home are preserved. Yeah, preserved for perpetuity.
Yeah. So talk me through the process of writing this book, and how long did it take you? You said you thought of this book as you were leaving a dinner party and like driving through this very beautiful fall day. But what happened next? What was the process like?
Yeah, so from November 23, for a couple months thereafter, we came up with a list of homes that at that point, my goodness, it was more than 40 buildings, and actually some of them actually weren't just homes, some of them were commercial buildings now that used to be homes. And I conferred with local architect Bud Adams, Robert Bentley Adams, of course, who has done work on so many homes in Old Town and lives here, and his beautiful house on South Fairfax Street is in the book as well. He wrote the foreword to the book, and he's been a friend for years, and asked him to help me revise the list because I knew it was becoming unmanageable and the book would take ages. And then we started to reach out to homeowners early in 2024 and started shooting homes late spring, early summer that year. And that for me was new, and working, of course, with an acclaimed professional photographer who's shot interiors and architecture all over the world, Gordon Bell. We, of course, had our pre-shoot visits with the homeowners. And so it was quite a process. And of course, you're trying to shoot something on the schedule of the homeowner. And sometimes we'd have to reschedule the shoot because Gordon uses only natural light. So if it was really cloudy or dark day, I've never known anyone who follows weather apps to the degree that he does.
That's so funny, because you hear about photographers want the best light, right?
He really does.
So
and he was very particular about what light also he wanted for his exterior shots. And he wanted to wait for some of the north-facing homes. He wanted to wait as late as we could into the year to make sure that the natural light outside was really bright. And in the meantime, the homeowners, I'm doing research on their respective homes, asking them questions about them, writing up descriptions of the homes, running them by, cross-checking facts. It was a fun process, but it was laborious, and from start to finish, it took about 2 years until we went to print. Yeah.
That's a long time.
It was a long time.
And now you gave birth to your third baby.
I gave birth to the baby, and I think for me, not only was it a lot of fun to be able to have something completely new, and as a longtime lobbyist, when you work in legislation, oftentimes you're working on a bill that may or may not ever happen, right? And so it's really nice to have a distinct product to be able to point to have a baby, to be able to say, wow, we did this from start to finish. It exists where you could work on the reauthorization of a bill for more than a decade and not ever see it come to pass. So that for me was a real pleasure. And also getting to work with the homeowners. I think another thing that was exciting for me and also really fulfilling to see is how some of the facts that I uncovered in my research, some of the stories that I uncovered in my research, was new for some of the homeowners, that they just didn't know that of a
About their
home,
own
right,
homes.
about their own home. And some people were very well researched, but even though, for those who were well researched, including a home here on your block, in my research on that home, the Chapman home, I learned that the original owner and builder of the home, who had a very colorful past, which is a whole separate story. He had been in a duel when duels were banned in Virginia, and so he and his opponent, whom he had some argument with that happened here at Gadsby's Tavern around the corner. So because they weren't allowed to have duels in Virginia, they took it across the river to Oxon Hill, Maryland, and everybody survived. But
How about that?
there's that aspect. But he also had slaves, and when he passed away, in his will, while an older African-American slave was appraised in the assessment of his estate the same amount as a horse, which I think is just absolutely just shocking to read, that this woman who worked for this guy for years was appraised at $50, the same value as a horse. But at the same time, he left her a share in the value of the home. So their relationship must have been very complex and much closer. And of course, considered that the appraisal of his estate would have been done by some third-party entity. But then later, he leaves her a share of the home and the right to live there in perpetuity.
Wow.
Which she ultimately did not. She ultimately was bought out of her share of the home by members of his family for more. But I thought there was an incredibly touching and complex story, and also about the history of African Americans in Old Town, which still needs to be delved into even more.
That is incredible. I had no idea, and I love that home. I love the wisteria. It's just very Instagram worthy.
It is.
So would you say that's your favorite home, or is there another home that stands out to you?
I do have a favorite, but I'm not going to say who it is. Like all of your children.
You can't pick a favorite. Yeah, I understand.
But one of the other things that was discovered about that home here in the 200 block of North Royal Street is that initial homeowner, who I think was Captain McGuire, he was a builder or a house joiner, and so in addition to building several homes on your block, he also, I later realized, built quite a few homes in the 1100 block of Prince Street. And I ultimately connected the two because both homeowners of the homes that we were covering in those blocks, respectively, they both said, well, yeah, our homeowner was in a duel. And then I thought, well, how likely is it that there are this many duels?
Out in Old Town.
And then I realized it was the same guy, that he had built homes in different locations. That was his profession. But the other thing that was really cool about that was that the home on Prince Street has a more traditional federal facade, and the home here on North Royal Street has, I still don't know why it's called this, but has what's an Egyptian revival facade from the 1860s. So the home on Prince Street has windows that are 12 over 12 in the front. The home here, its windows were height expanded. The front door was increased, so it's a much taller facade. So you also see sort of the progression of architectural styles in the book. But, I love them all. I think they're all special.
That's so cool. I love that.
It's a very special home, and you're right. The wisteria in that home is amazing. And I remember when we were shooting in the spring, I had to shoo away people who were coming to take pictures from the wisteria because it's so popular. I'm like, stop, we're on a professional photo shoot, please, but.
Yes. Yeah, we're actually in the same book club, Lisa and I, and so I have a goal that she's going to host. She doesn't know it yet, but I'd like to ask her to host us in her garden, especially when the wisteria is in bloom.
That's a great idea, and I'm sure it would be a lovely gathering, and she'd be a great host.
Yes, the ladies of the block and I are in a book club together, which I started a couple of months ago, and it's been fun to get to know the neighbors, and we've definitely developed a greater sense of community. And to tie that in, your book underscores how beautiful Old Town is. It's very easy to fall in love with Old Town.
It is. It is. And a book club is a great example. I was in a book club for years here, and when I moved to the suburbs outside of Old Town to have a big yard for my kids, I realized that my neighbors on both sides of me, and we have large lots, but they had lived there respectively for more than 10 years each, one of them more than I think 20 years. And they met at my house for the first time when I hosted a cocktail party.
Oh, nice.
Because they didn't know. And then, of course, during the pandemic, when people were going on walks more, there was more of a sense of cohesion, but I started a book club in my neighborhood, and we have spanned in age from 35 to 92. I think it's important. It's a great way to build community, and now we have, parties that include the significant others or spouses, and building community is important.
Yes, absolutely. I really enjoy book clubs, and I really enjoy community, and reading books and having a deadline forces me to read. You can also listen to books these days, right? So I love walking around Old Town with AirPods in my ears, listening to podcasts or books that we're reading.
Same for me. I find that I get most of my book reading actually done by listening these days. I really enjoy that.
Yes, it's a lot easier. So I want to go back, Anne, to something that you mentioned that relates to buildings, and that is your lobbying for museums, because I actually don't know much about lobbying for museums and what kind of issues museums worry about. Would you be able to elaborate on that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think when people go to a museum and a zoo, and I've had many zoos and aquariums over the years too, they don't realize that those communities are highly regulated sectors. You don't really think about that. And the issues that we did broadly is full service federal relations for our clients, which some firms are different, but everything from pursuing funding for clients from appropriate federal funding pots to regulatory relief or regulatory revision to pandemic relief. As a matter of fact, a big client of mine in Chicago, the Field Museum, there was a provision in one of the pandemic relief programs that would not have allowed the Field Museum to do a certain thing with its pandemic relief funds, and so I lobbied folks on the Hill to change that provision. Legislative relief, legislative initiatives, I'm going to be on the Hill on the Senate side this afternoon, meeting with staff about a bill that I've been working on for a client that's a regional initiative, conservation-oriented, heritage-oriented. So it varies. And then I would say the zoo community is more regulated, certainly because they're dealing with live animals. And it could be anything from getting a permit to collect an animal, permit to transport an animal, or even animal parts of a long deceased animal. So did a lot of work with USDA, Fish and Wildlife, the Department of the Interior, National Science Foundation. It's been a lot of fun.
That's so cool.
Real honor, yeah.
How did you get into it?
I got into it, goodness, I've been working at the Environmental Protection Agency in their congressional office, and I think I was there for 7 years, and I decided it was time to go to the private sector. We wanted to buy a house in Old Town.
Right, sure.
Right?
All comes back around.
All comes back around and I ended up working being hired at a small lobbying firm as one of their lead lobbyists, and that lobbying firm had a lot of nonprofit clients. And I knew within a short period of time that perhaps I wanted to focus only on museum work. And so I worked there for a year and then ultimately put out my own shingle, and thankfully one of their clients ended up coming with me, and then by word of mouth, a lot of my business initially started in Chicago. And Chicago, even though it's a big city, it's a very small town. Everybody knows everybody. A lot of civic pride, just like Old Town. And so just was fortunate that our stable of business expanded over the years, and then of course nationally. So yeah, a lot of fun.
That's so interesting. I never would have thought about these issues, but that's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. So in terms of your book, do you think there will be a second one? Are you working on a second one or thinking about a second one now?
Yeah, I am. I'm thinking both of a second book and a third book. I'm definitely, as a matter of fact, Gordon the photographer and I just had a really long call about the potential scope of another coffee table book. There's so much good material here in the DC region,
Yes.
Whether it's DC proper, whether it's in the suburbs or the countryside.
It could be Delray at home.
Del Rey at home. Some people have said I should do Holland Hills at home, but I'm thinking of something a little bit broader. I still want to include historic homes, but I certainly want to include a bigger range of architectural style, which I tried to do in this book with the interiors. But so we're chewing on it. And I also have another book concept that's a little further along that actually touches upon the themes of community.
Oh,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, similar to where you are with your concept, but for the podcast. But this is about the different stories, different community members, and how they relate or how they're different. I think now in our 250th year as a nation, and when we see how divided we are and how divisive things can be, I like to think, at least when people are telling their stories, that they find a shared experience with someone whom they may not have realized that before. So yeah, both are underway. Neither one is in production yet.
Well, we'd love to have you back when you have those books out, round 2 and round 3.
Thank you, Jane.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Anne, where can folks buy your book if they're curious to get one on their coffee table?
Thank you. Yeah, the book is available locally at the stores at Patina.
We love patinas.
Yes, Patina is lovely. Made in Alexandria. Creme de la Creme.
Okay.
The Virginia Florist. And the Alexandria Visitor Center. It's also available on my website, AnneMetcalf.com.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I just want to thank you, Jane, and congratulate you on doing this. I can't wait to hear the different interviews that you have with different Alexandrians. It's a really great concept, and I applaud what you're doing.
Thank you, Anne, for being on the show.
Oh, thank you.